Hello listeners, it's Mr. Gerald Lord, the one and only, here with yet another installment of Another Point of View. Last week, in a rare break from the norm, that is the 3-segment format, I decided to give each one of the show's previous 4 guest hosts their own installment to speak their mind without format restrictions or topic restrictions, as a build-up to our 50th installment. So once again, this show will feature a past guest host of the show with roughly 10 minutes and a microphone. This installment features previous guest host, the Marquis. I've known the Marquis a good number of years now, as both a personal friend and as a colleague. And I can honestly say he is a unique individual, and I mean that as a compliment. When you think of the word Marquis, you generally think aristocrat. Flashy, elegantly dressed, perhaps an old-fashioned appearance comes to mind. The Marquis, the individual, is in many ways a person who embodies and holds true to that image. But when I chose him to be the second guest host of the show, that wasn't the reason why. You see, the Marquis, along with having a flair for the theatrical and an interesting choice in attire, to my knowledge has never shied away from saying his opinion on a matter and backing up his position to some extent. So without further ado, it's time for Marquis Madness.
Hello, this is the Marquis, and welcome to my segment. So, it's that time of the year again, where you gather around the table with all your family members that you don't like to talk to, and then racist Uncle Jim starts talking about how Mexicans are coming into our country, they're taking our jobs, they're making American family values for naught. And they're not speaking English. Those darn Mexicans, why won't they learn how to speak any English? Well, have I got news for you. For the most part, they actually do speak English, but racist Uncle Jimmy may be onto something on the language front, even if unintentionally and for the wrong reasons. Now, it is somewhat a matter of debate about whether or not immigrants should learn the native language of a country. The United States has no official language. However, English is the de facto language throughout the majority of the country. When most people come over to the United States, they tend to learn how to speak English in order to be able to get around and communicate with people. That's not to say, however, that the opposite isn't true in the country. There are places where it's encouraged to learn the language of people that are migrating here. For example, Ann Arbor in Michigan, with its large Arabic population, or Miami, Florida, with its extremely huge Hispanic population. Now, should people that come to the United States learn how to speak English, or should we accommodate to them and learn how to speak their language? This presents a problem. If we were to try and accommodate everyone that came here and learn their language, that would include several languages that for the most part are not very useful within the country, such as Mongolian, or Kazakh, or Thai. However, in other countries, it is encouraged to learn their native language. It is considered rude and in bad taste to move to other countries, such as, for example, Germany or Italy, and not learn how to speak German or Italian. You don't go to Germany or Italy knowing only how to speak Bulgarian, for example. Now, there may be a few Bulgarian speakers in those countries because of the fact that this is Europe. However, it is encouraged that you learn how to speak German or Italy respectively for each country. Now, why is the same not true in America? Our closest neighbor, Canada, for example, their official languages are English and French. However, French is mostly only spoken in Quebec. In Quebec, you have to learn how to speak French in order to live there. French is also encouraged, and other languages are downplayed in order to keep their culture. This brings up the question, when is it okay to learn how to speak another language, and when is it okay not to learn how to speak another language for the sake of the country that you're moving into? Recently, there has been a large influx of refugees coming from Syria and Iraq. The vast majority of these people speak Arabic. However, upon migrating into Europe, these refugees are learning the official languages of the places that they are in, and in a very unusual move, a lot of these countries are also teaching Arabic to its citizens in order to encourage refugees to come over there. Now, in America, the vast majority of people that live here know how to speak English, and there are indeed people that come here refusing to ever learn how to speak any English. This puts them at a slight disadvantage unless they live in places such as, for example, Miami or New York, where it doesn't really matter. So, when does it become a problem for people to come here and not learn how to speak English? When does it become a problem for us to accept people and not bother learning their language for the sake of accommodating them? These are interesting questions that, while your racist Uncle Jimmy may not entirely be aware of, he does grudgingly bring up a point about people coming here and not speaking English. That's not to say that people don't speak English in several other countries. You can freely go into most of Europe speaking only English, and you'll be fine. In Austria, for example, the vast majority of the people that live there know how to speak English. The same is true in Germany and Norway and Sweden. In fact, the majority of the countries in the European Union have more than 50% of their population knowing how to speak English. This is particularly true in the Germanic countries like Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, and Austria, but it is true pretty much everywhere else, going lower as it ventures further into Eastern Europe. That's not to say that you should go into these countries not knowing how to speak their language. They will probably find it kind of rude that you at least didn't even make an attempt to. Now, in most of the world, language is a very tricky subject. There are countries that have more than 100 languages spoken in them. For example, Nigeria. Then there are countries that are, for the most part, pretty much homogeneous with its language-speaking population. Countries like these include Japan. Japan is one of those countries that actively encourages people coming there to learn how to speak Japanese. If you don't know how to speak Japanese and you're in Japan, you're on your own. And that's nobody's fault but your own. They're not going to accommodate for you. So, what do we do about this dilemma? Do we encourage more people to take up other languages for the sake of people coming into a country? Or do we make the people coming into a country learn how to speak the official language of that country in order to get by? There are unprecedented crises in which things like these are unavoidable. For example, the current Syrian refugee crisis. There were other refugee crises in the past, however. For example, when America was scared of communism and started letting pretty much every single Cuban into the United States because reasons? I'm not going to downplay Cuban migration here, but their plight does not seem as urgent because they're not being slaughtered by the hundreds and thousands. During World War II, there were several Jewish refugees leaving Europe but being turned away in the United States for one reason or another. Official language enforcement has always been a tricky subject, especially in places where official language is not really a thing. While it might be considered cultural destruction, the concept of a lingua franca has helped people of various cultures get together and speak. Should a lingua franca be encouraged across the world? As of right now, the current lingua franca is English. English is taught in pretty much every country that has anything to do with English-speaking countries. Before, the lingua franca used to be French, or français, as lingua franca would imply. And before that, there were several lingua francas throughout the world. Chinese, for example, in the Asian hemisphere, and Latin in the European hemisphere. And of course, Arabic. Arabic is a language that is not widely taught throughout the world despite its growing importance in world politics. One would have thought that Arabic would be a more widely taught language, what with having some of the largest amount of countries speaking a unified language in the world. More people learn how to speak Italian in schools, despite the fact that Italian is really only spoken in one country. 2 if you count Libya, rather parts of Libya, but it's not very important in Libya. So, why is Italian chosen to teach in schools over languages that are more important, like Mandarin Chinese or Arabic? In hindsight, this actually results in a lot of miscommunication during crises such as the current Syrian refugee crisis. If more people were being taught how to speak languages that are more important, such as Arabic, then certain problems that might have arisen, or certain problems born out of ignorance, might be solved more easily. So, during your Thanksgiving dinner, make sure to thank your racist Uncle Jimmy for unintentionally having a point about language learning. He may be wrong, and he might be a douchebag, but he unintentionally brings up a good point. What if the rapture did come, but everyone on Earth is such a huge asshole that nobody was saved?